Okay. Hi, I'm Jess, and this is Jetsetter. I'll be interviewing people who live or have lived internationally. My husband and I lived in Asia as kids, and once we were married, we moved to Shanghai, China to do it all over again, but as adults. I'm fascinated by international life and the experiences of people who live abroad. Everyone has a story to tell, and regardless of where they've been or how long they've lived abroad, they're really also cool. So, sharing these stories can bring people together across the globe. Welcome. Okay, so today I'll be interviewing someone who has been a part of my life as far back as I can remember. When I try to go back to my furthest memory of him, I can't think of it. But what does come to me are smiles and giggles and warmth. He would tell me what to do and how to do it, and as his little sister, I would completely abide. And not only because he was my big brother, but because he was engaging and convincing and made things come alive. I think the plentiful hours of us being in airports and on planes and moving to new countries with only knowing each other brought us so close together. While I know that he has so many accomplishments under his belt, probably a bunch I don't even know about, these are my strongest and happiest memories of him and make me proud to call him my big brother. Okay, so let me share a little bit more about him. My brother Larry was born in Bloomfield, New Jersey, our town about 20 miles west of New York City. In 1985, our family moved to Singapore, where we lived for 2.5 years, and where Larry and I attended Singapore American School. In late 1987, we moved to Hong Kong, where we lived for another 2.5 years, and where we attended Hong Kong International School. Our family moved back to the US in 1990. Larry completed middle and high school in our hometown. He attended Georgetown University for undergrad and NYU for graduate school, and began a career in real estate investing after college. He spent most of his career as an asset management firm, BlackRock, where he ultimately had the title of managing director and was a member of the real estate executive committee. He is now a partner of Falcon Partners, a private equity real estate firm, which actually he started with his best friend. He and his wife, Jackie, and 2 kids live in Madison, New Jersey, and travel as much as possible, although not enough, whenever they can. Larry, welcome to my show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be honored.
Good,
Am I
good.
the third or fourth guest?
You are my fifth guest.
Fifth. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
you're my fifth guest. Not all of the shows have aired just yet, but they have been recorded and will be airing weekly.
What took you so long to ask me?
I couldn't have my first guest be my brother. That
True.
would be like totally lame.
That's
Okay,
true.
so you know that we haven't really talked about our overseas experience since we've been adults. I don't think. I don't. So I'm just really excited to have you here to talk with you about all things kind of international living because I feel like we've had a very different we've had the same experience, but I think it's impacted us different ways.
Yeah, probably.
Hmm.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so we're not that far apart in age. The 3-year age gap was big enough, I think, for us to have different experiences. You were in Singapore. You were in Singapore and Hong Kong from 7 to 12 years old, and I was there from 4 to 9. Um, what were some of the highlights that you can recall? Like, I think you had a pretty positive experience. So what do you remember about it?
Well, I think it's true that the older you are, the more you realize that the place that you're living is in a lot of ways different than your home country. As a little kid, life for a little kid is probably not that different, from place to place. So for me in Singapore, I was still kind of a little kid, although I noticed things were a lot different. And then Hong Kong really was the place that I realized that, this was different. And the experiences we were having were not typical of kids in America.
Mhm.
And that the world is different, as you go around. And I mean, in terms of the experiences I remember, again, I remember a lot from both places, but stuff of consequence, that you're talking about, I remember in Hong Kong really developing a fascination for the Chinese culture, all things Chinese. And even when we got to visit China in the late 1980s, I remember the Forbidden City being the most amazing place I'd ever seen. The Great Wall, the summer palaces, and remember China back then in the late 1980s was all bicycles,
Mm-hmm.
traditional Chinese dress in Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing a Caucasian person was unusual for local Chinese residents, and it really was a different world than it is today. But I was so fascinated by everything Chinese. I mean, half of the things in our house are from Asia that I stole from mom and dad.
I know.
Uh,
I'm like, when was the last time you were there?
but I remember, the story of the last emperor when we visited China, Puyi, who I think was deposed in 1912, and the stories of the dynasties and the fact that China was ruled by dynastic leadership until then was fascinating to me. Yeah, I remember in Japan how formal and polite the culture was,
Mm-hmm.
how there was an order to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there was a paternalistic attitude among companies and their workers. There was a hierarchy of respect, uh, very formal and maybe not written, but everybody knew it. Everybody knew
Mm-hmm.
the code.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the hustle of Bangkok, and the traditional dancing there. I remember so many. I remember so many things, but I think the Asian culture is the one that I absorbed the most and stayed with me for a long time.
And what about just being a kid in, I have the most memories of you, obviously, in Hong Kong over Singapore. But what about just like being a kid? What were kind of some of the highlights that you maybe recall about being in school or your friends and um, just maybe even day to day life?
I mean, being a kid is kind of being a kid, because we were in, Singapore and Hong Kong too are the most cosmopolitan cities in Asia. So
Mm-hmm.
you had people coming from all parts of Asia, even all parts of the world, to live there, and so you didn't have to, immerse in the local culture the way that you might have to if you move to some Middle Eastern cities or even a place like France, where you have to really know the language to thrive. You don't have to know it to survive, but you need
Mm-hmm.
to know. In Hong Kong and Singapore, I remember in my third grade class, uh, we were told that we had 40 nationalities comprising the class. And it's not like in America where you may have 40 nationalities in a classroom, but they're far removed. These were
Mm-hmm.
actually kids from those home countries, 40 different
Mm-hmm.
home countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was the best because you really don't see people. It's the thing that we would like to achieve in the United States, where you see people just for the content of their character and not anything else. And that's what we learned there, I think, because having white friends was probably the minority. I
Mm-hmm.
probably had a minority of white friends as well. I shouldn't say that. Probably
Or
50%
American, yeah, minority of
American.
American friends, yeah.
True, true. Some were Europe,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the others were from all over the place. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that was great.
Yeah, and I think also that it's not just seeing people for their character in the US, but also appreciating kind of the cultures and the background that accompany, individuals.
Mhm.
That it's not that just the conformity of or just like, oh, character in itself, but also being able to appreciate everything that comes with them as part of an international person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Uh,
That's just a great experience for a kid to be in that environment. There's
mhm.
not just
Yeah,
one prototype.
I don't think you could replicate that any other way except for being in it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
like I don't think that's something that could be replicated in the US. I think it's
Yep.
something that you'd have to experience by going to a truly international school.
Yeah, because even a place like New York, where there are more national, or Houston now has the most nationalities in the country in one
No,
place.
mm-hmm,
People tend to live within, neighborhoods that are dominated by one community. So,
mm-hmm,
maybe it's self. I don't want to use the word segregation, but it's self imposed in most cases. But and so you tend to go to school with kids like you and your family, whereas in Singapore and Hong Kong, it was everyone from everywhere.
I think the unique thing about that too is that everybody's a foreigner. Almost
Yes.
everybody's a foreigner there. So everybody is without their home country
Yes.
right there. So you are kind of forced to, and not in a bad way, but you are kind of forced to kind of have your own community with one another, um,
Well, it was
and get
just
to know each other.
in the air. I mean,
Mm-hmm,
differences were celebrated.
mm-hmm,
Uh, families, people were so used to moving every few years in and out that people were much more accepting of new people and bringing them in close and more quickly. And so you got to, just meet a whole lot of different people. The other thing is, um, because of the nature of it back then, especially, was that most people were transplanted at a request of their company or military or whatever. It's not like today where a lot of people seek those opportunities. I mean, there was always some people who wanted to live overseas, but the majority were asked to go by their companies. So you
mm-hmm,
had a collection of people that were risk takers, adventurers, people who wanted to take a chance. And so you're surrounded by this kind of great, for a kid, it's a great vibe and a great example to have of all these interesting families. I mean, there's
mm-hmm.
probably not one family that we knew that you would describe as, run of the mill or,
Right.
so that was great as a kid overseas. But I mean,
Yeah.
day to day, you played with your friends and you went to school and you did things that kids do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just normal day-to-day life. Yeah. So, do you remember having any challenges of growing up overseas? Like, was anything that was particular
On my end, you're frozen. So I'll answer the question and hopefully your image comes back to me because right now I can't. Your image is frozen. But um, I don't think there were any. I don't remember any challenges. I think moving to a new place is a challenge more for some people than it is for others in any circumstance. And some people hit the ground running and some people take time to get acclimated. And I definitely needed time to acclimate every time we moved. And so, but that was the only challenge, was moving to a new place and having to get used to it.
Right. We're back and it's recording. So we're just going to keep going.
Okay. Where do we get off?
Oh, I just asked you for if there were any, I guess this is also just kind of what happens when you're using technology in your own home, and we just got to roll with these punches. I'm sure we're not the first to experience them. But anyway, so we were just talking about, I just asked you if there are any struggles that you had experienced, any specific challenges that you had to growing up overseas.
I don't think there was anything about growing up overseas that was a challenge. I think the challenge was certain people move easily, and certain people, they move and they hit the ground running, and certain people, it takes time to acclimate. And just my personality is I take time to acclimate. So I think the only challenge was, however, the first however many months, just getting used to a new place and new school and new friends and things like that. But there was nothing in living overseas per se that was a challenge.
Do you remember that in Singapore and
Yeah.
Hong Kong, taking time to acclimate and get used to everything?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think, as being as young as I was, 4 and 7, I have no memory of
an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even 9, moving back to the, New Jersey, I have no memory of that. And anyway, that's interesting for me to hear that you can recall that.
Yeah.
At that time.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I remember each move.
Was there anything that stuck out in particular that felt uncomfortable to you or took time?
No, I think it's just newness. Mostly starting a new school. And once you realize that maybe half of your class was new, you weren't the only one new, then the nervousness kind of goes away.
Yeah, there's something comforting about that, knowing that you're not the only one going through it.
And in each place, I remember the families that we lived among, were very welcoming, and you got to know their kids, our parents' friends' kids, and then in school you made your own friends. So I wouldn't say there was anything challenging. Probably more challenging for mom and dad as adults than as kids. I don't know. I'm sure one day you'll ask them that.
I've already had those conversations with mom and dad, but maybe we'll have them on here too.
Yeah.
Mom does recall that she had a nice time. She had an easy time transitioning to Singapore, but she had a harder time with Hong Kong.
Oh, that's
She said, well, she'll probably share one day, but she shared with me that when she moved to Hong Kong, we had moved there, I think, in January of 1988, and she struggled for like the first 6 months, and then she went back to New Jersey. We went home for summer. And then when she came back, she said that's when
It picked
she
up.
was like, felt great about living there and really
Yeah.
appreciated it.
Yeah.
Which is a long, I mean, what's it, when you're only there for 2.5 years, it's a pretty significant amount of
I mean,
time,
it
right?
seems like we were there for so long because it was
Mm-hmm.
practically, when you're a kid, it's
Like a
almost
quarter of your life.
right.
Right.
But for them, it must have gone so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're right. 2.5 years in each place is not a long time.
No. Okay, so um, you had a hell of a time acclimating to American life when we moved back to New Jersey. You moved back when we were in seventh grade. You were 12 years old. What was your experience like leaving Hong Kong? Were you excited to move back to New Jersey since we had been there every summer since we had left? Do you have memories of what it was like leaving and what your feelings were like actually coming back?
Well, I loved Hong Kong. I loved the school. I loved our apartment complex and all the their built-in friends there.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. And I don't think leaving was so hard because it almost felt like every other summer when we would come home for the summer with mom. So, except for the packing up of the apartment, it didn't feel like that different. And yeah, I wasn't super upset about leaving. I missed it more once I was home.
Mm-hmm.
We were not going back for
Mm-hmm.
for the school year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I loved Hong Kong. I have so many great memories there and so many friends.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you don't realize until you look back. You don't realize it when you're a child in the moment, but we had so much freedom there, uh, right? Like we would just
Incredible.
go downstairs, and we lived in an apartment complex where there were three buildings. We had a pool, a clubhouse,
Tennis
and
court.
other kind of tennis courts, other kind of facilities, and then we could also just jump on a shuttle and go into like the little town area nearby in Repulse Bay. And
Yeah.
so not only did we have so much freedom within like our community, like our apartment complex, but even being able to leave,
Yeah.
we had some freedoms there too,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
which is
Which,
different than.
now, I would probably wait till 11 or 12 at minimum to let my kids do that. And then with a friend,
Mm-hmm,
but back then it was like 8 years old. You just jump on the bus and go
mm-hmm.
and shop or hang out and then come back. It was, yeah,
Without
it
a
was
cell phone, without
no
anybody
cell
tracking
phone, nothing,
you. Yeah.
nothing, nothing. Yeah, it's
Is it
crazy.
that?
Think about it. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But,
So
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Lara.
No, go ahead.
I
I,
was going to ask you another question, but if you had more to talk about, that's
no, not
fine.
really. Not really.
Okay. So what was your seventh grade transition like for you?
So the summer I remember was great because it was like any other summer, going to the
Mm-hmm.
beach and visiting family, and kind of the same routine almost as any other summer.
Mm-hmm.
And the Godeckers were great. They had us over and we played, and those were our sort of
Neighbors down the street.
or my earliest friends, neighbors down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would see them all the time, and so that felt like home and normal. And then the school year comes around, and it's like, oh, we're not going back to that place where all my other friends are. And I started middle school. uh, I was almost 13, and that's just a difficult age to move. And in the US, most people are born or move to a town when they're very young, and then they live there and go through high school. And that's probably, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a vast majority of people are with the same people for all those years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the new one. Uh, on top of that, I had stayed back in third grade because I was really young for my age. I think I started kindergarten when I was 4. So in
Mm-hmm.
third grade, they had me, just because of the curriculum there, do third grade again. So I was not even coming back to the same, classmates that I had. And so it was like moving again to another different place all of a sudden. It,
Mm-hmm.
uh, new school, new people, a lot of people who are already known each other, uh, a different sort of environment in terms of, the new kid is like really the new kid. You weren't
Mm-hmm.
one of many, many new kids. So that
Mm-hmm.
that was hard to get over. But, you know, it is what it is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we got through it and things returned to normal.
What was it that kind of turned it around for you? What made it, how did things turn to normal? What were key
I
players
think
there?
it was the start of the following school year in eighth grade, where I met the 5 friends, the really good friends that I had from then on through high school and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
They were really, we were really a close group of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
that's what, kind of set a new track uh,
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Finding
Yeah,
your group.
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, I'm smiling because I mean, I remember you guys, everybody coming over the house. That was your crew
yeah,
for middle school and high school and into college,
yeah, yeah.
and including your wife,
Yes,
including
including
Jackie.
my wife. So she was one of that group of 5, and just it's funny how those things happen. But I knew early that that was the one for me. But it's sometimes not good to know that early. So we didn't
Hmm.
wind up dating seriously until after college, and then the rest is history. But
You knew Jackie was the one for you in middle
yeah,
school,
I knew. Well, I don't know if it was actually middle school, but
high
very
school.
early, very early. Yeah, yeah,
That's really sweet. I don't think I ever knew that, Lar.
yep, yep. So that made moving back, that just put me on a new track, and the move home was that drama was, not that there was drama, but that drought, I guess, in
Hmm.
feeling like I was in a place that I liked, that was over.
Hmm.
And then you just start, as you get older, you start thinking back on your experiences, and um, I think you start to appreciate things more, and you think about more of what you were exposed to and how much you learned and how much that place is in you always.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
I as the years go on, like I definitely think that had a big impact.
So what do you think that there was kind of any one thing? Well, I guess let me get back to that. But so okay, so it definitely had an impact on you. I think it's so true that it's always with you, right? Those years will never, or even though they were so long ago, they're always with you.
Sure.
What do you think? Um, what do you think? I guess how would you say that those years have impacted you now as an adult? Because I feel like we do look back, we do appreciate. How do you think it's kind of shaped you into kind of who you are today?
Well, I don't know that I would have been as curious about other cultures and other places, right? I mean, had we not been exposed to them.
Mhm.
That's kind of the obvious one that probably every kid who grows up overseas. What's your nickname for them? You have a
Third,
nick
oh, it's not my nickname, but they're called we are
Third
considered
culture
third
kid.
culture kids.
So
Hmm.
third cultural kids get hooked on that, and it's just something that we probably all share. Uh,
Hmm.
I really appreciated Hong Kong.
Hmm.
You know, Hong Kong was the of Asia.
Say it again, because you cut out.
Oh,
Hong Kong
sorry.
was the
Hong Kong was the go-go city of Asia.
Hmm.
I don't mean go-go bars, but I mean hyper capitalist, laissez-faire government, a flat tax. Everybody came there to make it, and that had to have impacted me. Not just because it was in the air, but because the the policies of those places. You think about Singapore and Hong Kong. Geographically, they're very small. They
Tiny.
have, they have no natural resources. They have no vast land, you know, in their borders. They do have the sea, which makes them important. But what makes them so right across the border, there are countries that are much larger, much more resource rich, that are less successful. And what makes Singapore and Hong Kong so successful is the embrace of capitalism and the embrace of minimal government interference. And these two little places that have nothing really inherent about them, except for their location by the sea, by the ocean,
Hmm.
are
Hmm.
the thriving capitals of Asia. And what could it be? The only thing it could be is their policies. So I think I didn't think that while I think about like that while I was there,
I
but I
didn't think so.
but I thought about it, later.
Hmm.
People vote with their feet, you know,
Hmm.
and Singapore and Hong Kong are the magnets for people all over the world
And they
because
continue to be,
and they continue.
right?
It's a
Not just
shame what's
when we
happening
were
now.
there.
I think it's a shame what's happening in Hong Kong now with the
Mm-hmm.
crackdown on the justice system uh,
Hmm.
in violation of the treaties that were signed in 1997.
Hmm.
But anyway, I think that impacted me. I think I had an appreciation for business and wanting to start a business, and I think that came from there.
I,
Uh,
I have to absolutely kind of second that. And I agree with you there because I feel like that's where I started to see you. And I smile because there was lots of there
uh,
were lots of there was lots of we were still kids at that point, right? Like we were still 12 and under. You were 12 and under. That's where there was still lots of play happening, and it came out a lot through our play of, okay, I'm going to build this Lego city, and I'm going to build this bit. And you're very talented in terms of, building and architecture and seeing things spatially, perceptually. And so you'd build these beautiful houses and structures with your Legos and stuff. And I was 3 years younger, but I was also not as talented. And so my little slum shack would go into the corner into a different part of town, and that's how we started to play, some of our game, that would come out in some of our games. But I mean, that's just one example. But I saw a lot of kind of your interest spark and peak in terms of what the business world was like, I think there. And um even like just some of the wealth, recognizing that there was a lot of money that was made there. And I think kind of that sparked your interest, I would say.
yeah, I think it did.
Hmm.
But it's a funny thing happens too when you maybe it happens after you live overseas for a kid. Maybe as an adult, it happens while you're living there. But I think
Hmm.
it's weird. You fall in love with different cultures and different ways of thinking and ways of doing things and customs and things like that, and
Hmm.
you really draw it in and try to adopt some of them and celebrate them.
Hmm.
But it's almost paradoxical. At the same time, you, or at least for me, I appreciated more my home country for what it was.
Hmm.
You know, uh, a country where one of the few and the first where we, the people, tell the government what it can do, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
A place where, you can move to France, but you'll never really be French.
Mm-hmm.
You can move to Japan and you won't become Japanese. But anybody in any part of the world can come to America and become an American. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really special thing. And so you wind up appreciating more of what you didn't know before there and more of what you did know here. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost a paradox. I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but
Yeah, I think I never had that kind of reflection until I moved to Shanghai, and I think I had part of that reflection, but I also had an appreciation. It was so mixed, right? Because it was like, oh, I love being having this international life that's so rich and complex. But at the same time, I appreciated being an American and being able to knowing that I am I can come here because I'm an American. I mean, obviously, there are many other cultures and countries uh, who had also moved there and were living kind of the Shanghai kind of lifestyle, or expat lifestyle. But I knew that I was able to come there because I was an American, because of all that our country has provided for us as Americans, all the freedoms and benefits. And I kind of knew in my gut that if something were to go wrong, I would have certain privileges as an American that maybe other countries wouldn't offer their citizens,
yeah.
living in Shanghai.
I mean, it also kind of, the experience colors the way, what's happening in the country today. Um, it's okay to admit, and you should admit that, our history isn't perfect. But you also realize overseas, no country in the world has a perfect history of
Mm-hmm.
harmony and equal rights and things like that. And in some cases, it was much worse. And you realize that America is the one place where those ideals are written into our Constitution, and where, if anywhere in the world it can be achieved, it's here. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, we have to work on things, and for a lot of segments of the population, it hasn't happened fast enough. And we
Mm-hmm.
have a long history of, segregation and racial discrimination, but this is the one place in the world where it can happen. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think you realize that when you live in other places, for as wonderful as they are, and each one of them is wonderful for different
Mm-hmm.
reasons. We are really a collection of people from all over the world, uh, I think we can live up to our ideals,
Mm-hmm.
if we commit to them, individually as people. And yeah, I mean, there were small instances of, we also heard, or I did more in Hong Kong. I was a little older than you, but you heard of instances of uh, terrible injustices happening in other, because we were more exposed to global news than I think the U.S. was, especially at that time.
Mm-hmm. And I think going back to what you were saying about America being able, not being perfect, but still being able to move forward and trying to make things right. We have people from all over the world that are make Americans America, right? And so with all those different perspectives coming in and having voice, it makes our country richer, I think,
Yeah,
than just having one group of people who have seen things the same way for a long time.
absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know what your original question was, but
I think it was, I don't remember either. something about seventh grade and
I don't know how
struggles.
experienced, but
Okay, so moving on. Okay, so now that you're a parent, what would you have done? What would you have done when the time came to leave Hong Kong? Would you, mom and dad had this difficult decision to make. They had actually they had committed that they would only be overseas for 5 years because they really thought that it was important for us to come back to New Jersey to grow up with our family, with all of our cousins, aunts and uncles and grandparents. Um, you know, Adam's Adam's family was very different, which is just as good, neither right nor wrong. They loved being in Singapore, and they really wanted to be there for as long as they could.
yeah,
But my father-in-law's job told him, "You need to go back to Chicago, or else we're not going to keep you." Pretty
yeah,
much.
yeah.
And so he went back kicking and screaming. So now that you are a parent, and now that we're adults and both of us parents, I think about this sometimes. What would you have done if you were mom and dad's shoes and it was, your company had said, okay, your time is up in Hong Kong. Here are your options. You can move back to Singapore.
It was
You
one of
can,
their options, right? That was
yeah,
one of
that was one of their options. You can move back to New Jersey. I think we were supposed to move to Syracuse, New York, I think for a little while.
mm,
What would you have done if you were mom and dad's shoes?
in exactly the same circumstances.
Yeah, same circumstances, but knowing what you know now, what do you think you would have
I don't
done
know.
having a
I
family?
I think it's hard to answer that, but because the circumstance, part of the reason also was that were that our grandparents were getting older and they wanted us to have time with them and vice versa. It's really hard to say. I I think the one notion that you should go to high school, you should return to your home country, sooner than later because that's just that's where you're from. I don't think that holds much water with me. If there are family considerations or other maybe the job offer is much better back home, and for that reason you take it. But I don't I don't think there has to be this notion that you should move home because it's because it's home. If
Mm-hmm.
if you're having a great experience where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I don't know what I would have done. I wasn't in dad's shoes. I don't know what the roles were like. I don't know how he perceived the move back to Singapore.
Right. There's lots of pieces that we're not aware of.
Not aware of, and maybe the circumstances would be different today. They definitely would be different today. The world is
Mm-hmm.
so much smaller today, and communication is so much easier, and you don't get isolated. And a
Mm-hmm.
move overseas isn't a departure from your career path the way it kind of was back then.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's almost, at least if you're in corporate life, a badge of honor. If you do some of the company's business overseas. But back then, it was easy to get off your track if you considered your track to be a U.S. based career. It's really hard to say. I mean, I I, I think staying would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
Would have been fine.
Mm-hmm. 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 And I've asked mom, so
What does she say?
well, I think at first she was sticking to her guns about our decision. But I was like, but mom, you you didn't have to work if you didn't want to work. I mean, you had all these luxuries and we kind of lived a very comfortable life there, and you had lots of friends, and there was
Yeah,
lots of interesting things happening and places that we were going to and traveling to. And she's like, yeah, and the bank said that they would bring us back twice a year, so
right,
that
right,
would have been good. I'm like,
right.
yeah. So she kind of turned it around a little bit. Who knows, she might change her answer again,
Yeah,
next time I ask her. But
yeah.
um I mean, she acknowledged all the wonderful things and opportunities that we had. So,
I think maybe used to be an idea that like you should come home because that is home, that's your home country, and I don't think you uh, violate or reject that notion that home is home just because you're
mhm,
living somewhere for a long period of time.
mhm,
Um, and uh, yeah, so I don't think I would be bound to come home for that reason. Maybe some of the
mhm.
other reasons would have. I don't know. That's a good
Well, so
question.
yeah, I mean it's complex, right? Okay, so you and Jackie did well. Jackie did a fair amount of traveling. Your wife did
Yeah,
a fair amount of international traveling before you two were married, and then the two of you did some international traveling once you were kind of together and married.
yeah.
And so, have you discussed how or when you'd like to expose Claire and James to international traveling? So,
Oh
Claire
yeah.
is Claire is 9. She's almost 10, right?
Almost 10. James will be 6 next month.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're just about there in terms of age. Uh, Jackie's the way Jackie travels is not leisurely. Uh, when you go to someplace new, it's a breakneck speed. You see everything. It's you from early in the morning to late at night. So I think part of it was waiting until they could they could handle the pace. And
Can I come? I would think I would be interested
yeah,
in traveling the way
yeah, yeah.
Jackie
She does. I mean,
does.
she does it great. She does. I mean, you don't miss out on anything.
Right.
I think they're just about ready. I mean,
Hmm.
Claire and James have gone international if you count the Caribbean, but
Right.
going to a resort is not exactly experiencing anything. But yeah, we'd like to do that. Maybe next summer, hopefully, if the virus is more under control and
Mm,
things are opened up a little bit and safer.
I know. I'm still kind of living in a la la land of without COVID. It's kind of, I don't know, at least for me, it's kind of hard to just, I have such a travel bug that it's hard for me to just say that, oh, travel's going to be on hold indefinitely,
Yeah,
until things kind of shape up. I mean, it doesn't really look like things are slowing down at all.
yeah.
So it's hard to know when things will happen. But
Well, the
in,
spread of
in
the infection is, getting worse in certain parts of the country, but I think their treatment of the infection is now much better than it was in the beginning, and
Mhm.
they've kind of a friend of mine whose wife is a doctor has said, they're sending 80 and 90-year-olds home fully
Mm,
recovered. So they
mm,
have the cocktail of drugs that help most people get through it.
mhm,
Um, at least here in the U.S., if that's not available internationally, then they're going to have a tougher time of it. Uh,
mhm.
yeah, but I hope it does. I hope it does get under control so we can all go places again.
Right, right. And this is actually kind of a project that kind of came as a result of COVID,
Yeah,
being staying home more and kind of simplifying life a little bit more
yeah.
and seeing what is important to you. And, so it did kind of bring me internationally, even though I didn't physically go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So do you guys ever see yourselves living abroad? I know you guys like to travel abroad. You went to Portugal in March. Like I said before, you and Jackie have done some international traveling. Have you ever discussed or talked about living abroad?
It's a little hard because I have, you know, my own business, and that's hard to just pick up and transplant somewhere else.
Hmm.
Um, I think if I were still at BlackRock, which was the firm that I was at for a long time, I think international opportunities would have come up, and I would have we would have seriously considered them.
Hmm.
So it's a little hard. I mean, you never know. You never say never. It could happen, and I'd want to try a million different places. I don't know which one I could pick first, but
Hmm.
uh, uh, yeah, I don't know that we're gonna. It's hard to say in the near future that is even in the cards. But life
Right,
changes,
right.
so you never know.
Right. And I, same for us, like living internationally again is not in the near future, but maybe down the road. So
Yeah.
if maybe even if like you and Jackie are retired,
Yeah.
is that
Oh yeah.
something that you would ever consider?
Well, her plan is have a home base for 6 months
Mm-hmm.
and then live internationally for 6 months. I better have
Mm-hmm.
a bajillion dollars by the time we're ready to do this, because that doesn't sound like a cheap proposition. But that we would love doing that. Love
Mm-hmm.
doing that. Get
And
an
we're
Airbnb or VRBO or whatever it is at the time, and just camp out for a few months in each place and decide, do we want to stay or do we want to try someplace else? And
mm-hmm.
fortunately, Jackie's a great planner and researcher, and if left to my own devices, I could never accomplish that. But uh, she definitely would do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why she, not just because of her planning abilities, but I think that's also why she makes a good partner for you, is because she shares some of that
Oh
interest
yeah.
and curiosity
Oh
of the
yeah.
world with you.
Yeah.
Would you say that she even does more so than you do?
No. No.
Is it
Uh,
pretty equal?
it's pretty equal.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty equal. Like when we were in Portugal recently, and we were in mostly Paris before that, which she had been to and I had never been to. Uh,
Hmm.
and we just soak it up. I mean, when she's probably better at executing a great travel plan than I am.
Hmm.
I just don't get in the weeds as deeply as she does. So
Because of
I,
because of what? Her planning skills, or
yeah,
because of?
and just her willingness to research and look at different things for hours and hours.
Hmm.
I just don't have that, chip in my brain. So I benefit from her, really good planning and enthusiasm for getting at it.
Hmm. Hmm. Are there things about traveling internationally that make you feel uncomfortable now? Like, I think as kids, when we were there, it was kind of like we just showed up and we were along for the ride and we just did whatever,
No.
our parents did.
Right?
But
Like what are you thinking of? Because nothing makes me uncomfortable about it.
well, sometimes, oh gosh, I've told this before, but when I went and did a look-see in Shanghai, China, I thought, oh, I've lived in Asia before.
Yeah.
Like I, it'll be like coming home sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, it was so foreign. It
Yeah.
was so foreign. And it had been 20 years, 20 plus years since I had
Yeah.
been there, that I was really out of my comfort zone. And there
Yeah.
were moments even living there that I just felt out of so out of my comfort zone that I just felt like I needed to retreat a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
vacation is definitely different than living somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's what I was going to say. Your apprehension was because you knew that this was a decision you were making to live.
in the long term. Yeah.
You can vacation or visit any place and not, if you're not bound to it, you're not. Those feelings aren't the same.
Right. You just keep moving on.
I would probably be
Hmm.
frustrated since I don't speak any other language very well. I'd be a little frustrated if I went to a place where I just, couldn't communicate. Uh,
Hmm.
you probably lose something in the experience if you can't communicate with people. But
Hmm.
but no, nothing makes
Or
me.
gain something too,
I guess you could, yeah. I
in
guess
a
you
way.
better gain a language pretty quick if you
Yeah.
want to survive. But no, nothing makes me I mean, are there places in the world that would make me uneasy to go to? Probably, because just they're not as safe as. But not travel in general.
Mm-hmm. Okay, since Claire and James probably won't be growing up
Yeah.
abroad,
Yeah.
um, in kind of a fantasy land, if at all possible, what would be kind of the one thing you'd like to pass on to them from your experience living abroad?
Yeah, that is kind of a fantasy because I don't think you can do it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think you can pass anything on in that way, no matter how much you talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. That's a hard question, and I'll do a little what's coming right off the top of my mind. I think you'd want to teach them that the world is a small place, a very small place. Um, that people everywhere, want peace and freedom and um, dignity. They have different, cultural mores and norms and things like that. Don't ever judge something that you don't know or haven't lived. Uh, but it's hard to give them, like I told you what I took away from living in Hong Kong that probably shaped me as an adult, into adulthood. If you don't live that experience, I'm not sure there's anything you can, you may have picked up something else. Somebody may
Mm-hmm.
have picked up a love for, Asian art or Buddhism or something different.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it unless you do it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't pass anything on. I don't think,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little, when you think about it, it would make me want to find an opportunity to live overseas for their benefit because
Mm-hmm.
it changed our lives.
Who we are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think I would regret. You can't regret anything that you haven't. Well, I guess you can regret things that you haven't done. They wouldn't regret things that they haven't done because it wasn't their choice. But
Mm-hmm.
I would want to, we do want to expose them as much as we can. Hopefully, once a year to different places.
So, do you have a place on your list of where you want to take them first, or places that you've talked about?
Uh, I think Europe is naturally kind of the easiest for young kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's close. The For kids who aren't, who need their sleep, it's maybe the easiest to manage. Europe's, there's so many places in Europe to go, but
Mm-hmm.
eventually I'd like them to see more,
Mm-hmm.
Asia, South Africa, um, maybe South America. I've never been to South America.
Mm-hmm. Me
That's something
neither.
I'd like to do. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it matters too much. I think what
Mm-hmm.
matters is that they get there, wherever that is, and see it. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't live it when you're there for even 2 weeks, but you know, you definitely take something away that you didn't have before.
Absolutely. Good. Well, Lair, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun for me to talk with you about this because I know we've never really talked about it in this way before.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Off camera, I'll ask you all the same questions and you can tell me.
I'll plenty to say. Okay. Thank you so much, Lair.
Take care. Love you.
Love
Bye.
you too.